Those Days with the Monsters, Part 55. Voices swirled overhead. Kirrel groaned, trying to think. The exhausting, shaky feeling of atmosphere exchange was nearly gone, but it was difficult to process what had just happened. Or worse, what he should do now. Everything felt heavy, and he wasn't sure he should try to move yet anyway. This place felt a bit similar to Rickthorn, and it was often best there to pretend to be asleep. He was less likely to be bothered that way.
We lost 30 good fighters to this little maneuver, and did you forget we're already running short?
An irritable, rasping voice demanded. It was definitely a Tzyx. Given the number of soft shuffles running around, there were quite a few of them around. But only one was talking. The one speaking must be important.
We've done the best we can, sir.
That was a slightly higher-pitched voice, much slower and steadier.
And we can't say it was a complete failure. There's this fiber bundle and a bit of data, and this, whatever this is.
A soft tap at the side of Kirrel's head probably meant that he had been gestured to, or nudged with a foot or something. He tried his best to not respond.
A snarling meat sack is what it is. Don't forget, one of the ones we lost went out to this thing.
Kirrel's frills went slightly red. That couldn't have actually meant that, right? The translator had mentioned a connotation of death, but that couldn't be right. Kirrel wasn't sure he was even as tall as a Cuman, and the Tzyx towered over the Cuman crew. He was simply too small to have done something like that. The translator must be having trouble again.
It wasn't a complete loss, sir,
the other voice repeated.
The quick gate connected properly this time. We usually lose about 30 fighters to a failed connection, even before the war creatures come into play, so our losses are lower than expected. Lower than expected won't get any of us to the Bridge of the Ravening, will it?
The lower voice grumbled.
If there's no one in the flagship, what good are the rest of us?
A hissing rattle that Kirrel's translator interpreted as a sigh sounded.
What else are we meant to do? Everyone of higher rank is busy biting each other's underbellies. Just do your best, sir.
In a much quieter tone, the lower voice muttered.
My best would be better in a higher seat.
The steps around Kirrel were much further away. He risked opening his eyes and glancing around. The room was brightly lit from a large blue-white star shining in from above. The Tzyx around him glittered a bit in the light. Kirrel hadn't realised they were shiny black. Somehow he hadn't been expecting that.
It's awake,
someone called, and another black bulk rushed at him. Kirrel's frills flared red-black, and he lashed out with one foot, expecting to be completely overpowered. He wasn't. Instead, a sickening wet thump sounded as his rear claw made contact, and the Tzyx looming over him made a strangled, gasping noise. It was suddenly very heavy, as well as a little bit cool and rather wet. Kirrel's entire foot seemed to be a blur of green.
By the hungry, medic, and someone restrain that thing.
Kirrel felt the weight of the Tzyx being pulled off him, replaced by the equal weight of Tzyx appendages pinning his legs and shoulders, and to a lesser extent his head. The muddled feeling resolved, and he realised that a Tzyx wearing blue leg bands was crouched over another one nearby, this one oozing green from its chest. Kirrel's frills went red-black as he realised what was going on. The green on his leg was blood. That hole, he'd made that with his rear claw.
No good, sir. Straight through the ventral notch and ventral hemolymph channel. Clear through to the cardiac cluster. He was gone on impact.
Kirrel thought his heart was trying to migrate to his toes somehow. Had he done that? Had he done that? His claws? The blue-white light seemed to dim and go grey for a moment.
What the hell kind of pet do these things keep?
That was the higher voice he'd heard before.
That's the second one it's killed at least. This little meat sack.
Footsteps rushed up on Kirrel. There was barely time for his frills to pulse an alarmed red that pushed out the black before something grabbed him by the throat and jaw and ripped him out from under the restraining Tzyx.
Calm down, sir. Don't tell me to calm down.
Kirrel gasped for air as the grip tightened. His eyes darted between the 7 eyes of the Tzyx in front of him. The size difference was suddenly much more apparent.
This little creature dares to kill my men in front of my eyes. This unbearable insult.
The grasping hold on his neck shook with fury. Kirrel thought his jaw would be pulled from the socket.
A lower life form took 2 lives under my watch.
He wanted air. He needed air. The room was spinning, and the Tzyx holding him was hard to reach.
I'm not sure it's a lower life form, sir. Don't kill it before we find out. And the Blood Devil didn't seem to like us taking it.
The grip on Kirrel didn't ease, but now it was accompanied by shaking and some shouting. He couldn't make out the words around the ringing in his ears. The calm, higher tones responded, and then silence fell. A horrible pause. The light blurred. Then, with an abrupt shout that thumped dully against his eardrums, Kirrel felt himself hitting the floor. Impact was less forceful than he'd expected, but he found himself skidding several feet, gasping for air.
Fine, but cover those damnable claws at least. 2 is enough.
By the time Kirrel made sense of things, some kind of heavy metallic spheres covered his feet. Felt a bit like the squishy sphere he'd had his foot stuck in before, only more glossy and less green and grey. Kirrel's frills turned brown in disgust as he realised he'd gotten his foot caught in something he'd killed. He didn't want to be a killing sort of creature. Ylan was supposed to eat plants and live quietly on their odd planet, not go around killing things so very, very much larger than them. This was too much like humans. Deep down, Kirrel discovered that he was still very much afraid of the humans, of their immense power and ability to strike so brutally, and now his own claws were bloody too, and he was afraid of them. It might be better that his claws were sealed in these spheres. He tried to move, but discovered that the restraints were held to the floor with some kind of suction, not that there was anywhere to go in the first place. The jump gate lay on the ground as twisted, blackened metal, completely ruined. Kirrel didn't even know where he was, but it seemed likely that if he made it through any doors he would find more Tzyx, more doors with more Tzyx behind them, and nowhere for him to go. Kirrel's frills flushed orange and red at the sound of fibre sheets flipping. One of the Tzyx was flipping through his journal. They shouldn't have that.
Stop it, that's mine.
Everything seemed to stop at his shout as all the Tzyx fixed their eyes on him. Kirrel could barely breathe.
I knew it.
That was the high voice, and it came from a Tzyx standing at one end of the room, on a slightly raised platform.
Knew what? What are you whining about?
The lower voice was a Tzyx flanked on either side by about 4 more, who appeared to have just returned to the platform. He seemed more important than the higher voice, which didn't bode well for Kirrel. The parts of his neck and jaw that had been shaken still ached.
It just talked. It's sapient. And what should I do about that? It's still a lower life form. Their fates are all the same. Unless you like playing nanny to a meat sack. You want to kill it?
Kirrel's frills flared wide and red-black. He'd somehow forgotten in his emotion about the journal that he was in a lethal situation.
It killed my men. It's right and just to avenge the insult.
The flanked Tzyx started forward again. Kirrel felt his frills go black.
Sir, I would advise against it.
The room went dead silent. The higher-voiced Tzyx was holding the other's forelimb. From the silent stares, this was a serious matter.
Tsuna, what do you think you're doing?
The lower voice carried an unmistakable threat. Probably no species in the whole universe would mistake it for anything else.
Saving your career, sir.
There was a moment of silence, then the others made a rattling click.
Fine. Explain. If it's not satisfactory, you'll go to feed the hungry.
The other, apparently named Tsuna, bent his head and let go of its superior's forelimb.
Yes, sir. That thing was in the same place as the Blood Devil. If you kill it and the Blood Devil goes into a rage, the responsibility will be yours. You said it yourself, sir, that your superiors are always looking for someone else to take blame. If you kill it, that someone would be you.
I see.
The superior waved one forelimb.
Your answer is satisfactory. It will not be killed. Rather, send a broadcast for those devils to see. I will see how well we can use the meat sack before deciding.
Cinna bent further.
Thank you, sir.
Kirrel didn't know whether to be relieved or worried. The Tzyx were about to try and speak to the humans, and he was stuck here, surrounded by Tzyx. He hoped the humans wouldn't do anything too crazy. Read by a Good Bean.